Hello there. I am sitting down with Commissioner Steve Brown from Bannock County, and we're talking a lot about the assessment issue that has been quite a big topic here over the past month or so. It's probably seemed longer than that, hasn't it?
Well, it feels like it's been going on a little while.
So let's, first I want to start off with full disclosure. I am married to Christy Davenport, who works for you in your office, yes. And I just want to let that be out there for full disclosure. So let's talk a little bit about the assessment issue. Where are we at currently?
We're in the middle of it. As far as the county side, we recently received authorization from the State Tax Commission to allow us to extend the deadline to hold the hearings of all of the appeals that have been filed.
And how long do you have until, how long do they extend it for?
We have until the 26th to finish up our hearings.
Okay. How many appeals do you have right now?
We submitted with our extension request 2,880.
Okay. Is that average, below average, above average for any particular year's appeals?
Well, in a normal year, let's take last year as an example, okay. We had we settled before it even got to us. The assessor's office was able to settle and bring it down to 13.
Okay.
So this is a little abnormal.
And it's a little abnormal because of the, I'm going to guess it's because of the above average evaluations that you have for the properties. That would be correct in saying that they are contributing to this high amount of appeals.
Well, it certainly feels above average, but when you look at many of them, they hadn't been adjusted for a number of years, and so they were undervalued, as well as the change in the market that we've had the last couple of years, which has been extraordinary in our real estate market, especially in this last year. So you add those together and it certainly feels excessive.
Now walk me through the process. We have, the mailings have gone out, people have received the mailing. If people did not agree with what they feel that their property has been assessed at, then they make an appeal. What happens start to finish for the process?
Well, they filed an appeal with the assessor's office, and those appeals came over to the commission office, and we've been trying to coordinate with the assessor's office those appointments to hear those appeals. Once you have those appeals, or once those are scheduled, they come before the commission. It's a formal hearing. And we sit as a quasi-judicial body, the commissioners, in a board of equalization, and we have two sides. It's similar to a court of law, but not quite. And we assume that the information under state law, we assume that the information from the assessor is correct, because the law assumes that it's correct. And then the appellant, the person, the property owner that's bringing the appeal, has to present information that gives us some sense that there was an error in the process.
And during this process, how many have you adjudicated so far up to this date?
Well, we've done just under 200, about 121 hearings so far. Out of that, we've had 31 that we've taken under advisement. We've upheld 45 of them. We've adjusted 13 on their valuations. And then we've had 25 go back for a reassessment. Overall, we've had about 250 so far that have resolved themselves before they even got to the hearing.
According to your numbers, you still have a lot to go.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that it is feasible to have all of them completed and heard by the deadline?
At the rate we're going, no. But, and it's a big but, we have been working with the State Tax Commission at looking at market neighborhoods and adjusting a larger percentage at one time rather than each individual one at once.
Let's go back to a couple months ago. Were you alerted, were you told, did the commissioners know, alerted by anybody in the assessor's office that this might be coming down the pike because of these high, I mean, it's just natural instinct for a person who owns property to open up their mailbox and see something as far as their property value jump so high. And it seems like it's affecting a lot of people. As you mentioned, it's an above average amount of appeals. Were you alerted to anything about that this could be coming down the pike?
We knew that something was coming. We didn't know it was to this magnitude. We didn't know that the adjustment would be so big.
Okay. So what do you say to the people who, I mean, obviously you've been in contact with property owners, you've been hearing their cases. What do you say to the person who says either I'm on a fixed income, I can't afford it, this is too much, to even to the very pendulum side of, you guys must be crazy. This is crazy. What do you say to them? How do you explain it to them?
Well, there's a number of factors that go into this. First of all, this isn't just a Bannock County issue. This is a statewide issue as well as a nationwide issue when it comes to the housing crisis. We have too few homes on the market for sale, and so it's this law of supply and demand. The fewer houses available, the higher the price is going to be. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And under the law, we are required to adjust to market value as close as we can. And unfortunately, that's the middle of what we're at right now. It's quite an interesting, complicated process overall, because county government, I believe the founders distrusted, the founders of Idaho when they wrote the Constitution for Idaho, distrusted government so much they made it impossible to work. We have 9 independently elected officials at the county, and no one elected official has any authority over the other elected official. They're independent. And so the assessor has their responsibilities under the law, and they execute them to the best of their ability or the way they see it. No one else in the county, as far as elected officials go, are in a position to dispute or change that. But the checks and balances are in place, and that's what this process is. You've got an assessor who went through the process of reassessment, and government, while it seems really messy at the moment, this is the process that was meant to be. If you disagreed with your assessment, you filed an appeal, and you come to an independent body aside from the assessor to hear that complaint.
Now, people who have come, they're coming to you in front of you in the Board of Equalization. After you get done with that process, what are you hearing from people saying? Are they happy with the process, satisfied with the process, displeased with the process?
It certainly is a mixed bag because the outcomes are different for everybody. For someone who their property was upheld, we've had some people leave frustrated, but we've also had people who sat through a discussion about how we got to where we're at and why the process works the way it does. And they might not have agreed with the outcome, but they understood the process a lot better.
Okay.
So it's a mixed bag.
Mixed bag. So when people get done with their Board of Equalization, then if they're not satisfied, that's when they take it to the state board?
Certainly, and this applies to either person, either party in the process, the assessor or the property owner. If either one of them don't agree with the decision of the Board of Equalization, they will be notified of the decision by mail, and they'll have 30 days from that receipt of that letter to file an appeal, and they file that with the clerk, or the county clerk. Under the law, it says the county auditor, but it's the same person as the county clerk. And then he forwards those on to the State Tax Board of Appeals, and that process continues on.
Okay. How hard is your office working? And I'm not talking just the commissioner's office, I mean the entire office of Bannock County. How hard are they working to try and resolve all these issues?
Well, much of operations of the county don't have anything to do with this. They're out fixing roads, they're out processing court fines, or making sure the court system works.
So the entire county has not been brought to a standstill?
No, but it's affected the entire county.
Okay.
Especially the negativity and the attacks, and some of them have been quite vicious. That affects all the employees. And I'm not saying that those, maybe the severity of some of those shouldn't have occurred, but I can understand people's frustration. I'm a property owner too, and mine went up quite substantially, and I guess I don't appeal to myself. So.
Okay. What would happen in that situation? Would you have to recuse yourself?
Well, I think I would bypass the county and go straight to the state.
Okay. So we mentioned a little bit earlier about how many you have left to hear as far as the appeals process, and you mentioned that time is not on your side on this. What happens if you get to that state-mandated deadline and those appeals haven't been heard yet?
Well, that's a very good question. We're going to find out if that happens. We're doing everything in our power to make sure we uphold everybody's rights to be heard. And one of those things is, for example, agricultural land, being able to put that all into one big appeal rather than hundreds of separate appeals. That's what we're working on right now.
Okay.
And so our goal is to make sure that we accomplish the legal task that's been assigned us.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about how this has affected you as a person. Obviously, you're an elected official. You've heard the voice of the people, I guess you'd say, calling your office, visiting your office during this process. How has that affected you as a person?
Well, that's difficult. I know that it's affected me emotionally myself, as I go home extremely tired, and my family doesn't see the same guy they did a few months ago. But you know, that comes with the job. We volunteered to do this, and not that we expected something like this to happen, but it is our responsibility to fulfill both sides of the law. And that is to hear the people and to sustain as best we can the assessor's responsibilities as well. And so it's been really difficult. Politically, I don't know if anybody survives something like this. But if your main goal is to get reelected, then you shouldn't have this type of job.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the assessor's office. There's been some contention between the commissioners and the assessor. Obviously, this is not something that anybody wants to have happen. How has that affected the relationship between the commissioners and the assessor's office?
It's obviously strained because emotions are high. When you're talking about 2,800 appeals, that means that office has to go and research 28 pieces of property, which is extremely difficult because it takes an hour, 2 hours to go through that process for each one. And we're scheduling these back to back because we don't have time. And so trying to keep up with each other is a difficult task. And so emotions have been running high. And when emotions are high, communication can be tough.
Earlier in this process, there was an issue of a new software program for the assessor's office that they said might have been a contributing factor in these assessments. Where does that stand right now?
The software was provided by the state of Idaho, and the software itself seems to be pretty robust and doing a pretty good job. The problem came into play with outdated data and incomplete data over the decades of compiled data from the county. And so when you take incomplete data and try to put it into a new program, it doesn't convert very well. And that's where our big stumbling block came. And we just ran out of time to try to correct all of it. But the state has been phenomenal in lending their support to try to fill in the gaps and correct those things as quickly as possible.
A few weeks ago, the commissioners were in front of cameras and they laid out property taxes and how they factor into property evaluations. And you mentioned at that time that, okay, we're doing what we can. Now it's up to city governments to do what they can. How's that relationship been between you and city governments?
It's a little bit of a struggle because the cities felt like we were calling them out a little bit, and that wasn't our intention. Our intention was to address the deficiencies on the county level first, and then call on everybody else that's a taxing district that uses taxpayer money in their budgets to be careful. We have an opportunity to go from one of the highest levies in the state, a combined levy, to maybe down a quarter of a third further down in the pack. So it doesn't look so bad. And that's a much deeper conversation about that equation. But the response that we've gotten back has been conditionally, I won't say optimistic, conditionally hopeful.
Okay.
Because government costs money to run. And so a municipality who's always behind the eight ball is going to take the maximum they can just to keep up, especially with inflation. But the bottom line is we have this big, huge valuation that has come in now. And so you have all of this dollar amount. That money can't just go be captured by a taxing entity. By state law, it is capped at 3% of last year's budget. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
Okay.
But people think, oh, it's 3% of the the levy rate, or 3% of my taxes, or no, it's 3% of the budget of the last year. And so we've got this large valuation, and then the cities and counties and districts all create their budgets, and then that equals the levy rate. People think that the levy rate comes first, and that's where we get our budgets. And the levy rate is set after everybody's budgets are set. It's a complicated and confusing process, and I don't know why government is so good at making things complicated.
It almost exists on that.
But in that vein, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
But in that vein, with the increased value and the cap on how much we can spend, we can't go capture that money. And so the levy rate will go down. It doesn't necessarily mean taxes will go down a lot. Some people will see them go down. Some people will have them go up a little bit, depending on if their home was undervalued or overvalued. But in the end, the levy rate will go down. It's a guarantee that it will go down. And hopefully we'll start to equalize out.
Okay. I've heard from some people, and I've seen on social media, of course, everybody has, rightfully so, their opinions as to this situation, and they've let it be known on social media. What do you say to the people who say, this is wrong, I can't afford to live here, I'm moving? Or somebody who says, I'm looking to move to Bannock County, but I can't afford it.
So valuation doesn't equal taxes necessarily. And I plead with people who are ready to flee the county. If that was your desire before this happened, okay. But if you're making up your decision to leave because of this situation, please wait. And the reason I'm saying please wait is let's see what the cities and the districts, the library district, cemetery district, fire districts, the school district, let's wait to see what their budgets look like so that we can see what the outcome will be. And it's a backwards process, but we won't see that until after all those budgets are set and everything's been certified. So we're talking about first part of October, we'll really have a good picture of where we're at.
So you would call on people to exercise patience?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you want an idea of what your taxes might look like, you can go to the State Tax Commission's website. They have a property tax estimator. In fact, if you just Google Idaho Tax Commission property tax estimator, it'll be the first link there. You put in your county, your taxing area, and what your net taxable property value was last year, and it'll give you the worst case scenario if everybody took the maximum they could on their budgets. And that would give you a window, a general window of what that might look like.
Okay. I have one question to ask you. This is fairly recent. This was something that was filed on July the 2nd. You can respond accordingly. A person who was contracted by the Bannock County Assessor's Office, Kevin Frank, has filed a tort, and he is concerned about a relationship that he had with the county that was dissolved. Can you comment on where that process is now?
Limited, because it's litigation. There's very little I can say at this point, that's the frustrating part about the government side is if there's litigation of any kind, there's very little we can explain. But there was concern about the contract that was there. There was a forensic audit that was conducted, and there was enough concern there to turn that over to the Attorney General's office for further investigation.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to add about this assessment issue?
I'm sure there's a whole bunch. Gosh.
As you mentioned, people are coming into your office and talking. What if somebody has a question that maybe, obviously the deadline to appeal has passed and they're not able to appeal, but what if they just have questions about how is this going to affect me? What can they do?
If they exercise a little patience, then we can get to the other side of this and we can start having those conversations a little bit better. But at the moment, every day gets a little bit longer as we try to see all of these appeals and get through all of them the best we can. So as far as the business of the county and interacting with the public and getting the business done, it's difficult at the moment. We're fitting it in between the cracks instead of having that our main focus for the next couple weeks.
Okay, and then let's just close on this note. How does next year look?
I'm not sure. Part of it has to do with the market. The real estate market is in a growth pattern, which is a little scary because having lived here my whole life, I've never seen prices like this in my lifetime, and they're continuing to go up. And so one of this might be an interesting, one of the rules of the state in state code is that 20% of the property in Bannock County has to be adjusted and looked at every 5 years. And so over the course of 5 years, the entire county is adjusted. The other part of that law that the county has not followed is to index the other 80% that didn't get looked at in that particular year. And so what happens is we have properties that are 4, 5, 6, 7, some of them 10 years that have not been adjusted. And so they are way undervalued, they're way underassessed. And so right now we have properties that were assessed in the last couple of years, and they have an actual unfair burden when it comes to paying taxes because their value is higher. And so the idea is to bring those closer together. What has happened is we've been going for 5 years without an adjustment, and then there's a jump. Well, technically, under the law, you're supposed to look at 20% of the properties, index the rest of the 80, so it follows the market. And the idea there is that there's not these big spikes that we've seen traditionally in Bannock County. And that's one of the areas where the assessor's office is going to make some adjustments so that they index the rest of the 80% on an annual basis so that we have little adjustments instead of these big spikes.
So we can chalk it up to growing pains.
That would be part of
the
it.
extreme
Yes.
variety.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Steve Brown, thank you so much for taking time this morning. And we just want to let everybody know that this interview is being conducted outside of your normal business hours. And so we're not taking any time away from people and having their BOE appeals not being heard. So I thank you for taking the time and kind of explaining where you are in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.